He left his pregnant fiancée with nothing but a voicemail. 3 years later, he saw her at a charity gala, holding a little girl who looked exactly like him. Lauren Brooks stood alone in the luxurious penthouse, the city lights of Manhattan flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. In her hand, she clutched a positive pregnancy test, her fingers trembling, her mind numb. The silence in the room was so sharp it felt like it could cut through bone. She had imagined this moment so differently, maybe tears of joy, a shared embrace, plans for a nursery. Instead, she had just listened to a cold, heartless voicemail. Lauren, I'm sorry. This isn't part of my plan. I can't do this. Chandler Morrow's voice echoed from the phone's speaker, polished and distant. Please don't contact me again. It was like a trap door had opened beneath her. Chandler, the man she was supposed to marry in 2 months, the man who had whispered promises into her ear and kissed her belly goodnight, had vanished. No explanation, no confrontation. Just gone. Her knees gave out and she sank to the marble floor, the test clattering beside her. How could someone so composed, so intelligent, have been so wrong about someone? Chandler Morrow wasn't just her fiancé. He was one of the most admired young millionaires on the East Coast, heir to a real estate empire, a man with a sharp jawline and a sharper tongue in business. But in private, with her, he had once been gentle, or so she thought. The next few hours were a blur. She packed a bag in a daze, left the penthouse, and checked into a modest hotel under a different name. She knew one thing for certain. She could not stay. Not in New York. Not surrounded by memories of a man who had erased her from his life the moment she became more than convenient. By morning, Lauren had made up her mind. She would disappear. She had no family left. Her mother had passed years ago. Her father had never been in the picture. She was on her own. But she had a child to protect now, a life growing inside her, and she would do whatever it took to make sure that child never felt the sting of abandonment she was feeling now. As the train rolled out of Grand Central Station, taking her farther from the glittering skyline, she stared out the window, pressing a hand to her belly. It's just you and me now, she whispered. And I promise, I won't leave you. Not ever. The days that followed were the harshest Lauren Brooks had ever endured. She arrived in Norwell, a quiet working-class town in Pennsylvania, with 2 suitcases, $800 in savings, and a 5-week-old secret growing inside her. There were no friends here, no safety nets, just cheap motels, unfamiliar bus routes, and the ache of survival. She checked into a rundown women's shelter under the name Laura B. to keep her real identity hidden. The staff didn't ask many questions, just offered her a thin mattress, a plate of spaghetti, and a whisper of dignity. Her morning sickness didn't care about schedules. It hit her in the middle of job interviews, on the public bus, in the shared bathroom of the shelter. One night, she fainted while scrubbing dishes in the back of a diner where she'd managed to get hired under the table. The manager fired her on the spot, fearing liability. She cried alone in the alley behind the restaurant for an hour before walking back to the shelter in the dark. By the end of her first month in Norwell, she was exhausted, malnourished, and emotionally frayed. She applied for aid under a false identity, terrified that Chandler's name might somehow surface, terrified that someone might recognize her from one of the old gala photos. She avoided mirrors. She avoided people. But every night, lying on the thin cot, she would wrap her arms around her stomach and whisper lullabies she half remembered from childhood, promising this child that their life would be different, safe, loved. One particularly cold evening in early November, her body gave out. She collapsed in a convenience store while reaching for a bottle of water, knocking over a display of magazines. An ambulance came. She was admitted to the county hospital with dehydration and preeclampsia. Her lips were cracked, her eyes were sunken, but the baby was still alive. When she opened her eyes, there was someone beside her, a woman, older, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a bun and kind, watchful eyes. I'm Grace Ansley, the woman said softly, holding a cup of warm tea. You're not the first girl to land in this hospital alone, and you won't be the last, but you're not going through this by yourself anymore, not if I can help it. Lauren didn't know why, but she burst into tears. She cried harder than she had since Chandler left, her body shaking with it. Grace didn't say anything. She just reached over and held her hand, patient as the storm passed. In the days that followed, Grace visited her daily. She brought meals, helped her fill out insurance forms, and even found her a small, subsidized apartment near the hospital. She told Lauren that once, years ago, her own daughter had disappeared into the world with a baby and had never come back. I like to think that if someone found her, Grace said, they'd do for her what I'm doing for you. When Lauren gave birth, it was Grace who held her hand through the hours of labor. It was Grace who cut the umbilical cord, who cried with her as a baby girl, tiny, pink, and screaming, entered the world. Lauren named her Marlo. That night, as snow dusted the windows of the maternity ward, Lauren lay awake holding Marlo against her chest. For the first time in months, the fear didn't outweigh the hope. She didn't know how they would survive, or what the future would look like. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. 2 years passed, and the harsh outlines of Lauren's old life began to soften. The apartment Grace had found for her was small, just one bedroom, a kitchenette, and a leaky radiator. But it was theirs. A framed photo of baby Marlo sat on the windowsill, and homemade paper hearts clung to the refrigerator door. It was a life built from quiet resilience, every inch of it earned. Lauren now worked as an assistant bookkeeper at the Norwell Community Resource Center, a nonprofit that provided aid to struggling families. She had taken evening classes online in accounting, sometimes nursing Marlo in one arm while balancing spreadsheets with the other. Her days were long, filled with paperwork, food drives, and budgeting reports. But there was a purpose behind them. The center had once fed her when she was pregnant and hungry. Now she was on the other side, helping women like herself. Marlo had just turned 2, and she was already showing signs of fierce independence. She toddled through the apartment in mismatched socks, carrying a tattered stuffed elephant named Bellamy. She spoke in short, clipped sentences. Mama hug, no peas, up please. And her laughter could fill a room, but there was a softness behind her big, round eyes that seemed older than her years. Lauren sometimes wondered if children could feel absence, if Marlo somehow sensed that someone was missing. She had never told Marlo about Chandler. Not his name, not the money, not the hurt. To Lauren, he no longer existed. He was a chapter that had closed with a slammed door and a silent scream. Her focus was on the present, on keeping her daughter safe, on paying the rent, on making sure the fridge was never empty. Every Friday Grace visited. She brought groceries or hand-knitted scarves, and sometimes just a warm hug, when Lauren didn't even realize she needed one. Grace had become family, grandmother to Marlo in all but name. They would drink tea in the tiny kitchen while Marlo played with buttons in a soup pot, her laughter echoing like bells. One rainy afternoon, as Lauren was sorting donation receipts in the center's back office, her boss knocked on the open door. Hey, Lauren, you've got someone asking for help with a community investment grant. Said he was a private donor. I told him you were the best person to explain it. Lauren wiped her hands on her slacks and stepped into the conference room and paused. Sitting at the table was a man, tall and quietly composed, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and an unassuming presence. He wore a simple charcoal suit, not flashy, but tailored. He stood when she entered. Briar Nash, he said, extending a hand. I've been reading about the work you do here. It's impressive. Lauren hesitated for half a second before shaking his hand. There was something in his tone, genuine, curious, not performative like the corporate donors she'd seen on social media. She offered a small, professional smile. Lauren Brooks, nice to meet you. Briar asked thoughtful questions, not just about budgets, but about people. What families needed most, how to reach mothers too scared to ask for help, what would make a real difference. They talked for almost an hour, and by the end of it, something unfamiliar stirred in Lauren's chest. Not attraction, not yet, just interest, respect. After he left, she caught her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, worn sweater, hair in a lazy bun, and shook her head. Don't be stupid, she whispered. He's just another man in a suit. But deep down, something had shifted. And that night, as she rocked Marlo to sleep, humming softly against her daughter's cheek, a question floated through her mind like a feather. What if not all men in suits leave? Over the following months, Briar Nash became a regular presence at the Norwell Community Resource Center. He never made grand entrances, never announced himself with flashy cars or entourages. Instead, he'd show up quietly, often in a wool coat with sleeves dusted in snow, and offer to carry boxes of donated clothes or help set up tables for events. The staff quickly warmed to him. His humility was disarming, his questions sincere. Lauren noticed how he treated everyone the same, whether it was a single mother asking for formula, an elderly volunteer with a stack of paperwork, or the janitor mopping the hallway. He listened, really listened, and that more than anything made her uneasy. She was used to men hearing her voice, but not her story. Breyer was different, and that scared her in a way she couldn't name. One afternoon, while organizing financial reports, Lauren found a handwritten note in her inbox. Would you and Marlo like to join me for coffee sometime? No pressure. Just good company and hot cocoa. B. She stared at the note for several minutes, her heart thudding. Grace, who had come by to drop off soup, saw the look on her face and tilted her head knowingly. When was the last time you had coffee with someone who didn't expect anything in return? Lauren shrugged. I don't even know if I remember how. Grace smiled. Then it's time to remember. That Saturday, Lauren bundled Marlo into a puffy coat and met Breyer at a small cafe near the town square. The place was warm and full of chatter, the smell of cinnamon and espresso filling the air. Marlo was shy at first, hiding behind Lauren's legs, clutching Bellamy the elephant, but Breyer didn't push. He knelt down and offered her a gingerbread cookie shaped like a star. She took it slowly, studying him as if trying to decide whether he was real. He didn't bring up work. Instead, they talked about books, childhood memories, and the best local pies. Breyer told stories of growing up in a sleepy Vermont town, fishing with his grandfather, and learning to make blueberry pancakes from scratch. Lauren laughed, an unguarded, soft laugh that she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. When Marlo finally crawled onto Breyer's lap and fell asleep, her head against his chest, Lauren froze. But Breyer simply looked down at the little girl, adjusted her hat gently, and said, She's incredible. She is, Lauren whispered. She saved me. As weeks turned into months, their coffee outings turned into dinners, and dinners into quiet evenings at Lauren's apartment. Breyer never tried to take over. He didn't ask questions about Chandler, didn't push for stories she wasn't ready to tell. Instead, he became a constant, helping with dishes, reading to Marlo, fixing a broken cabinet door without being asked. One night, after Marlo had fallen asleep with a coloring book clutched in her lap, Breyer sat on the couch beside Lauren, his voice low. I know I'm not part of her past, but I'd like to be part of her future, if you'll let me. Lauren looked at him for a long moment, her eyes heavy with everything she had carried for years. Betrayal, fear, survival. I don't need rescuing, she said quietly. Breyer nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. And for the first time since the day she walked out of that Manhattan penthouse, Lauren felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Safe. Not because someone offered her shelter, but because someone saw her and stayed. The annual Winter Gala in Norwell was unlike any flashy event Lauren had once attended in New York. It was humbler, cozier, a fundraiser organized by the community center to support single mothers, local shelters, and food programs. Paper snowflakes decorated the hall, strung with twinkling lights, and the scent of mulled cider lingered in the air. Volunteers wore mismatched formal wear, musicians played soft jazz in the background, and the tables were adorned with handwritten thank you notes from children who had been helped through the center's work. Lauren hesitated before walking in. She wore a deep blue satin dress Grace had found for her at a vintage store in the next town. It clung to her figure modestly, and her hair was swept into a simple twist. She hadn't dressed like this in years. It felt strange, almost dangerous, like inviting something back in that she had worked so hard to shut out. But she had promised Breyer she'd come, and Marlo was bouncing in excitement in her tiny, sparkly shoes, proudly clutching her glitter glue invitation to Mommy's work party. Breyer greeted them at the door, his smile soft, dressed in a tailored, dark suit with a navy tie that matched her dress. He took Marlo's hand, bowed dramatically, and said, May I escort the lady to her table? Marlo giggled and curtsied clumsily. For the first hour, everything was perfect. They spoke with donors, laughed with volunteers, and watched Marlo twirl on the dance floor with other children. Lauren felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Ease, lightness, and then everything shifted. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. He wasn't supposed to be there. Chandler Morrow stood near the entrance, speaking with the mayor and a few executives from a New York investment firm that had partnered with the center for a donation match. He looked almost exactly as she remembered, clean-cut, confident, every gesture calculated. But his eyes were different. They were scanning the room, and then they landed on her. Their gazes locked. For a moment, time collapsed. Lauren's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her wine glass. He started walking toward her. She could barely move, couldn't tear her eyes away from the man who had once left her to face the hardest chapter of her life alone. She felt cold, exposed, vulnerable. Marlo, now playing near the dessert table, was laughing, her laughter crystal clear in the air, and that sound grounded Lauren. She turned away from Chandler, refusing to let him see her flinch, but he kept coming. When he reached her, his voice was quiet, uncertain, nothing like the voicemail from 3 years ago. "Lauren," he said. She turned back, standing tall. "Chandler." He looked past her, to Marlo, then back again. She's mine, isn't she?" Lauren's jaw tightened. "She's not a possession, and she doesn't know you exist." He nodded slowly, looking shattered. "I didn't know. No," she cut him off. "You didn't want to know. You made that choice." People were beginning to glance in their direction. Breyer stepped up beside her, his presence steady and calm, placing a hand gently on the small of her back. Chandler noticed. "I'm not here to cause problems," Chandler said quickly. "I came for the investment deal. I didn't know you were involved. I saw her. She looks exactly like my sister did at that age, and I knew." Lauren took a breath. Her voice was steady now. "You walked away from both of us, and we built a life without you. She is happy, safe, loved." Chandler swallowed hard. "I don't want to disrupt anything, but I'd like to talk sometime, just to understand." Lauren shook her head. "It's too late for that." Chandler stood in silence for a moment longer, then nodded and stepped back. "She's beautiful," he murmured. "Just like her mother." Lauren turned to Breyer, who hadn't said a word. He met her eyes. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, the tension beginning to leave her shoulders. "I will be." Across the room, Marlo looked up from her cupcake and waved. "Mommy, dance with me." And just like that, the heaviness lifted. Lauren smiled, walked across the room, and took her daughter's hand. As they spun together beneath the paper snowflakes, the past began to fall away, flake by flake, pain by pain, melting into the warmth of the life she had built from nothing. The days following the gala passed in a strange blur of stillness and clarity. Lauren felt as if her life had split into two timelines, one where Chandler Morrow had never shown up again, and one where he stood right in front of her and saw the child he'd abandoned before she was even born. That moment had reopened old wounds, but something surprising happened afterward. They didn't bleed. They simply reminded her that they had healed. Chandler didn't call. He didn't try to come to her apartment. He didn't show up at the community center. Instead, a letter arrived a week later. It was delivered by courier, hand-signed in his unmistakable sharp script. Inside, he apologized. Not in the vague, performative way Lauren had expected, but in detailed, unguarded words. He acknowledged everything. The voicemail, the betrayal, the cowardice. He explained that back then, he had felt trapped between the life his family expected him to lead and the future she represented. A future full of uncertainty, love, and responsibility he had not been ready to face. But mostly, he said, "I regret not having the courage to love you when it mattered most." Enclosed in the envelope was a legal document. Chandler was formally relinquishing any parental rights to Marlo. No legal battle, no claims, no expectations. Alongside it was confirmation of an anonymous endowment to the Norwell Community Resource Center. A multi-year, 7-figure donation. Lauren stared at the paper, her hands trembling. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure, but it was the first sign that he understood the gravity of what he had done. She tucked the letter away, not out of sentimentality, but as a record, proof that some people could face the truth, even years too late. Later that evening, she sat on the porch of her apartment while Marlo colored chalk stars on the sidewalk. Breyer joined her, handing her a warm mug of tea. He hadn't asked about Chandler since the gala, hadn't pressured her for details. But tonight, he finally said, "Was that what you needed?" Lauren took a slow sip before answering. "No," she said honestly, "but it's what I deserved. Not because it changes anything, but because I finally got to look him in the eye and say, 'You don't get to define me.'" Breyer nodded, his gaze on Marlo. "You did that all on your own." She looked at him then, really looked at him. For months, he had been steady, kind, present. He had asked for nothing and given everything, quietly integrating into their lives without trying to replace anyone or anything. It was never about filling a void. It was about building something entirely new. "I used to think love meant rescue," Lauren said softly, "but now I know. It means showing up, again and again." Breyer reached over and took her hand. "Then I'll keep showing up. For both of you." That night, as she tucked Marlo into bed, the little girl sleepily whispered, "Is Mr. Breyer staying for breakfast?" Lauren smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "If he wants to," Marlo grinned, already half asleep. "He makes better pancakes than you." Lauren laughed quietly. "Don't let that go to his head." As she turned off the light and sat down beside Breyer in the living room, something settled inside her. A peace, not from forgetting the past, but from no longer being defined by it. She was no longer the woman Chandler left behind. She was the woman who raised a daughter on her own, who healed, who chose love not from fear, but from strength. And the man beside her didn't complete her. He simply met her exactly where she already stood. Spring arrived in Norwell like a long exhale after holding one's breath all winter. Trees blossomed in soft pinks and whites, and children's laughter returned to the streets, along with the scent of cut grass and barbecue smoke. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like music, steady, quiet, comforting. Lauren, for the first time in years, didn't wake up with dread pulling at her chest. Mornings began with Marlo's tiny feet padding across the hardwood floor, followed by sleepy greetings and cereal that somehow always ended up on the floor. Breyer, now a regular part of their daily life, would usually arrive by 7:30, bringing coffee for Lauren and warm muffins wrapped in a napkin for Marlo. They had never officially defined what they were. No declarations, no grand speeches, just a slow folding of lives into each other, dinners, bedtime stories, quiet evenings spent curled up with paperwork and jazz in the background. He had a key to her apartment now, but he never used it without asking first. His respect was constant, and that, more than any ring or vow, had earned Lauren's trust. One evening, while cleaning out the office at the community center, Lauren stumbled upon an old storage bin filled with photographs from past events: fundraisers, outreach trips, donation drives. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a picture of herself, barely 27, 8 months pregnant, helping hand out meals at a Thanksgiving food bank. She stared at it, taken aback. She remembered that day, remembered hiding her morning sickness behind a painted-on smile, refusing to be pitied. It felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, the woman in that photo still lived within her, a survivor, a mother. That night, she showed the photo to Breyer. He studied it silently, then looked at her with a quiet kind of reverence. "You've come so far," he said. "I don't always feel it," Lauren admitted. "But I see it every day," he replied. The next week brought another letter, this time from the board of the Norwell Community Resource Center. They wanted to promote Lauren to Director of Operations. It wasn't just a raise or a title. It was recognition of everything, of her competence, her leadership, her tireless effort. She accepted it, not out of ambition, but as a declaration. She belonged here. She had built something real. One Saturday morning, Breyer invited her and Marlo on a drive outside town. "There's something I want to show you," he said. The road curved through rolling hills until it opened up to a wide, grassy field with a small white house sitting at the top. Modest, beautiful, quiet. Marlo ran ahead, chasing butterflies in the high grass. "I bought it a few months ago," Breyer said. "It's not far from town, close enough for your work. Big backyard, a room for Marlo, one for you. And if you want, space to build more." Lauren was quiet, staring at the house. Her throat tightened. "I didn't bring you here to pressure you," he said quickly. "This isn't a proposal. It's a question. Do you want to start something with me? Not just visit something that already exists?" She turned to look at him, the sun casting golden light across his face. "I never imagined having this again," she whispered. "And yet," he said softly, "here we are." Marlo came running up, cheeks flushed. "Is this our new house?" she asked. Lauren knelt down, looked into her daughter's eyes, and smiled. "It might be." And just like that, the future began to form, not out of ashes, not from the past, but from something entirely new, something earned, something real. The air was warm and sweet on the morning of the ceremony. Soft sunlight filtered through the tall oak trees that surrounded the little white house on the hill. Rows of wooden chairs lined the backyard, adorned with wildflowers Marlo had helped pick the day before. It wasn't a grand venue or a glittering ballroom, it was home, and that made it perfect. Lauren stood in front of the mirror in the small upstairs bedroom. Her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the neckline of her ivory dress. It was simple, timeless, and elegant. No diamonds, no designer labels, just something that made her feel like herself. Strong, loved, and ready. Grace stood behind her, pinning a delicate comb into her hair. The older woman blinked back tears as she met Lauren's eyes in the mirror. "You've come so far, sweetheart?" Lauren smiled gently. "I wouldn't have made it without you." "You would have," Grace said, "but I'm glad I got to watch you do it." Downstairs, laughter floated through the air. Guests, mostly friends from the community center, neighbors, and a few volunteers, mingled around the lemonade table. Kids ran barefoot in the grass, chasing bubbles and tossing flower petals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was overflowing with warmth and sincerity. Everything Lauren had once believed she would never have again was now right outside her window. Marlo stood proudly at the edge of the makeshift aisle, her white dress fluffed like a little cloud, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She clutched a small pillow with 2 rings tied to it, one gold, one silver, and beamed as the music began to play. Briar stood under the arbor they had built together out of salvaged wood and climbing vines. He wore a navy suit with the same quiet confidence he'd always carried. Not flashy, not loud, just present, just real. His eyes locked onto hers the moment she stepped outside, and he didn't look away once. Lauren walked slowly, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with awe. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't a do-over. It was something deeper. She was walking into a future she had carved out with her own hands, shaped through struggle, resilience, and finally, love. When she reached him, he took her hand with such gentle certainty that it sent a wave of emotion through her chest. The ceremony was brief and spoken from the heart. No grand speeches. Just vows whispered like promises made under the stars. "I didn't come here to rescue you," Briar said quietly, his voice trembling. "I came to walk beside you." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "You saw the cracks in me and didn't try to fix them. You just held me until I realized I wasn't broken." As they exchanged rings, Marlo clapped loudly, accidentally dropping the pillow into the grass. Laughter rippled through the guests. Lauren bent down, picked up the rings, and slipped hers onto Briar's hand with a smile that lit up her whole face. When they kissed, it wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was soft and steady, the kind of kiss that says, "We made it. We're still here." Later, after the sun had begun to dip and the lanterns were glowing softly in the trees, Lauren sat on the porch swing with Marlo curled up beside her, Briar's arm around her shoulders. They watched their friends dance barefoot in the yard, the music floating gently on the breeze. Marlo yawned and looked up at them. "Are we a real family now?" Lauren kissed the top of her daughter's head. "We always were, baby. We always were." And as the stars appeared one by one in the sky, Lauren finally understood. Happy endings weren't perfect. They were real. They were earned. And sometimes they came after the hardest roads. But they were all the more beautiful because of it. In the end, this story isn't just about heartbreak or redemption. It's about quiet, hard-earned triumph. It's about the strength it takes to rebuild when everything has been taken from you. Lauren's journey shows us that love isn't always loud or cinematic. Sometimes it's a steady presence that arrives when the world has gone silent. What makes this ending powerful is not that Lauren got married, but that she never let pain define her. She didn't wait for someone to save her. She became her own foundation, her daughter's protector, and eventually someone who could love and be loved again. Not because she needed it, but because she chose it. The beauty of this finale is its truth. Happy endings aren't neat. They're messy, full of scars and setbacks. But they are possible, and they are most beautiful when they are built, not given.